The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Jimmy Morales, President of the Republic of Guatemala. I request protocol to accredit His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Jimmy Morales, President of the Republic of Guatemala, and to invite him to address the Assembly. Mr. President.
Seneca once said, "No one loves their native land because of its greatness, but rather because it is theirs." Mr. President of the General Assembly, heads of state and government, ministers of foreign affairs, delegates, friends, everyone, good afternoon. I would like to thank Madam Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces for having successfully presided over the 73rd session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. At the same time, I would like to congratulate the president of this session, Mr. Tijani Mohamed Bande, who is already promoting an extremely constructive global debate. Mr. President, Guatemala is a firm defender of the rule of law and of democratic ideals, and by virtue of this year we are holding free elections in line with the international standards for democratic elections. It's important also to stress that for the first time in the political history of Guatemala, we have implemented the vote abroad by expatriates. This is a precedent to ensure the voting rights for outside of our borders as well. Now Guatemala has stronger institutions with technological capabilities to fulfill their role. In education, we increased the average number of days in classes, going from 163 days in 2015 to 198 effective days per year in 2019. This is an unprecedented achievement in the recent history of Guatemala. We also increased school enrollment to 3,122,000 students, and I can state with pride that we have multiplied by 4 our investment in school lunches. On this, we are basing ourselves in organizations of parents in each school who guarantee transparency of this program, focusing on education and the health of our children. For the first time, we have equipped 1,000 schools with the most modern technology, and we fully completed the delivery of teaching materials and textbooks in the Maya and Spanish language. Also, financial resources were disbursed in a timely fashion for all educational programs, and we guaranteed free access to education to every citizen of Guatemala. Furthermore, we implemented the program called Help Me Grow Up, which seeks to develop early childhood, that is, children from the age of, up to the age of 4, who in the past were not included in our public education system. Also, for those individuals who are not able to study in formal schools, we created a system to certify skills, which makes it possible to acknowledge and certify knowledge and skills of individuals who are doing jobs that they learned in the course of their lives, both in Guatemala as well as those Guatemalan citizens who are residing in the United States. Another focus of development has been to an international mechanism of open government 2016-2018. The outcome of this has been a national policy of transparency and combat against corruption. The government of my administration has focused on strengthening the culture of transparency and good governance. We set up a presidential commission for open public administration and transparency that goes hand in hand with the 4th National Plan of Action of Open Government in 2018-2020. In the area of security, we have taken firm steps and have achieved very positive indicators. We have reduced the rate of homicides per 100,000 inhabitants, and we have maintained the most favorable downward trend in this over the past 20 years. And this we managed to achieve thanks to the reforming, professionalizing, and enhancing the performance of our law enforcement bodies. The National police managed to dismantle dangerous criminal gangs who were involved in extortion, kidnapping, vehicle theft, and crime against cultural heritage. The number of police officers were increased from 31,000 in 2015 to 42,000 in 2019, and now they can work in more modern police precincts, better equipment, and better work conditions. In the area of infrastructure, we inherited a collapsing road network. 60% of our motorways were in bad or terrible state. However, after resolving the budgetary, administrative, and legal issues which involved most of the previous contracts, today we can say that 72% of our roads are paved, and they can be qualified good or optimal, according to an assessment carried out by the National Program of Competitiveness. And we hope to achieve at the end of this year a rate of 85% of roads in optimal conditions. And hoping that the next government not only will reach 100%, but in fact build new roads, more roads that our country is lacking. In the area of the environment, we enhanced the protection of our forests, which are the lungs of the entire world. By 2032, we are projecting reforestation of 1.2 million hectares of trees, and we've invested some $200 million per year in programs of reforesting incentives. I'd like to take this opportunity to express our dismay with regard to the recent forest fires in the Amazon forest. As you know, Guatemala has a very rich water resources, and for this reason we have initiated a process to preserve and clean up our rivers, lakes, and seas. Today, we are a role model in the world with the creation and implementation of the biobardas. These are barriers to capture plastic, which stop floating garbage. To date, we have installed 196 such biobardas throughout the country. Now, you're probably asking what they are. I'll explain to you. Basically, they are handmade barriers made of recycled plastic, and they serve to contain detritus and garbage that float in waterways. This invention has functioned very effectively, and now countries from the American continent and other continents are extremely interested in this kind of technology which Guatemala can share with them. Now, I have no doubt that we will be ready to support them because we are committed to the preservation of our natural resources. And also because this tool is a legacy that Guatemala wants to bequeath to humanity. Now, speaking of legacies, I want to share with you that recently we were able to deliver to the people of Guatemala the outcome of the 12th National Census of Population and Housing Stock. After 17 years of waiting, we have lived up to our pledges to the people of Guatemala and now have reliable statistics to design our model of development. The 12th census is one of the first in the region that is conducted in the framework of the 2030 agenda. And it was conducted on the basis of international standards of the Population Fund of the United Nations. Mr. President, now in our foreign policy, Guatemala and Belize have concluded a peaceful process to submit the territorial, island-related, and maritime claims of Guatemala to the International Court of Justice. This is a milestone for Guatemala, for Central America, and for the world, which has led to a peaceful and definitive solution to this long-standing dispute for Guatemala and Belize. The people of Guatemala and the people of Belize held their referendum in peace, and the results were positive and expressed a wish to resolve once and for all this dispute in the International Court of Justice. Currently, bilateral relations between Guatemala and Belize are the best they've ever been, and we are decided to continue strengthening this relationship. I would like to express my deep and sincere gratitude to the group of friends of Guatemala and Belize who have supported this process, where the focus is on dialogue, because dialogue is the basis of true democracy. Now, also, I'm happy to share with you that in November of 2018, in the city of Antigua, Guatemala, The 26th Ibero-American Summit was held. It was one of the highest in attendance and made it possible to define policies of cooperation under the motto, a prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable Ibero-America. At the international level, Guatemala considers that all countries, in particular those who embrace democracy and the principles that gave way to the United Nations, have the right to belong to this great organization. We believe that the experience and capabilities of the Republic of China, Taiwan, could contribute to strengthening multilateralism in this organization and its specialized agencies. Mr. President, the government of Guatemala would like to reiterate its commitment to the migratory policies that put human beings at the center of development and prosperity. We are ready to cooperate with a holistic migratory governance that respects the human rights of migrants at all times. We firmly share the ideals of a safe, orderly, and regular migration. For this reason, we are coordinating our efforts with various countries in order to tackle the root causes of this migration. But to mitigate irregular migration, it is necessary to take on shared responsibility, because all countries have a role to play in dealing with this problem. And only by working together will we take firm steps to ensure the well-being of our nations. Our presidential agenda has been based on strategic planning projected up to the year 2032. And along this roadmap, we've aligned our General Government Policy 2016 to 2020 with the 2030 Agenda of the United Nations. And each action of public policy that we have implemented implicitly means complying with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, for the state of Guatemala, it is essential to maintain peace, security, sovereignty, and respect for the rule of law. Consequently, a culture of respect for the sovereign decisions of states must prevail. This applies to the Secretariat of the United Nations, which infringed upon our democratic principles of self-determination. The very raison d'etre of the United Nations is to maintain international peace, global harmony, and to strengthen member states. However, the Secretariat of this authoritative multilateral body, in fact, polarized Guatemalan society through the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala. That commission infringed upon the principles of national sovereignty. It did not respect the laws of our country. It weakened the autonomy of our institutions. It put at risk social peace, and it undermined the governance of our country. However, what's the most saddest and worrying is that it did this with the consent of the United Nations, and it did it under the facade of combating corruption and impunity, which gave it the ideal narrative to politicize justice and to condemn our politics. And we, Guatemalans, will not allow it. We didn't allow it because we are a free, sovereign, and independent country since 1821. And when we speak of independence and sovereignty, I would like to inform this General Assembly that while the mandate of the Commission has ended, the consequences of its actions should be investigated thoroughly. Because under the leadership of Mr. Señor Iván Velázquez Gómez, that Commission on Impunity used the image of the United Nations for political aims in Guatemala. Iván Velázquez converted criminal prosecution into a tool of selective prosecution and assault, undermining universal rights such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Global Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, the American Convention on Human Rights, and he also violated the Constitution of the Republic of Guatemala. By the same token, he disregarded the principle of the presumption of innocence, the right of legitimate defense, and the judicial guarantee of due process, thus abusing the noble mandate that was entrusted to him. So I would like to ask this assembly, first of all, was the Commission on Impunity an entity of the United Nations? No, it wasn't. And I would like to quote the agreement that created this commission. Quote, not being a body of the United Nations, but rather it will function only in conformity with the terms of this agreement, end of quote. So once again, I ask you, to whom was this commission accountable? To the Secretariat of the United Nations, to the donor countries, or to the government of Guatemala? Curiously, the agreement never mentions who the commission is accountable to. And so to answer that question, we need to think about the following. If the country where the commission was operating presented its concerns regarding abuses committed by the commission to the Secretariat, why were these concerns ignored, given that Guatemala is one of the founding members of this organization? Several people in Guatemala have died due to this commission. Many others have been unjustly jailed, and others continue to be in remand detention without having had their initial declaration recorded even. So I ask you, who is responsible for these violations of human rights in Guatemala? It is worthy to clarify that the closure of the Commission of Impunity will have no repercussion on the judicial proceedings in which we have taken part, because all of these proceedings will continue under the auspices of the legally competent authorities in Guatemala. I wanted to make these clarifications because, unfortunately, the former head of the commission has sought to discredit my country, and he has done it taking advantage of the international mandate that he flaunted to promote an agenda that was adulterated by political and ideological interests that have nothing to do with the principles of the United Nations.
Dividió a la población guatemalteca.
Its action divided the Guatemalan people, but especially it betrayed the trust placed by our country in the Commission to fight criminal structures, which theoretically was its main job. But what it did was to convert the Commission into a criminal structure which co-opted Guatemalan justice. It is very regrettable and very alarming that international civil servants who are in the service of states would devote their energies to discrediting our countries before the international community. That's called disloyalty, because Guatemala opened the doors to the United Nations for the United Nations to support us and fight against corruption and impunity. And yet, low moral or ethical standards and the low level of professionalism of the former commissioner led him to commit a series of actions which good Guatemalan citizens are not prepared to tolerate, nor are we prepared to forget them. His ambition for power made him go from the judiciary to the political arena, and he referred to the support that he provided publicly to the former Attorney General, Thelma Aldana, that he promoted as a presidential candidate in our recent elections. Of course, for a number of different reasons, today the former Prosecutor General Aldana is a fugitive from the law, and we hope that very soon she will return to Guatemala. Please come home, Madam Aldana. It's not appropriate that no one is taking advantage of the jobs or doing what they're supposed to be doing and instead putting their personal interests ahead, nor even less that representatives of the United Nations or actors should not be overseeing independence, impartiality, objectivity, and justice. With regard to the role played by the press in my country, I will confine my remarks respectfully to quoting His Holiness Pope Francisco, who recently said, and I quote, "We need a free press. in the service of truth, in the service of good, in the service of justice, a press that would help to construct a culture of dialogue. Guatemala appreciates the valuable support of the international community, but know this, not a single cent of all the funds donated to the Commission were administered by the government of Guatemala. With a view to transparency, we believe it would be appropriate for the Secretariat of the United Nations to provide a detailed report to you about how every single cent was spent, what was spent and what wasn't spent in establishing the Commission, from the establishment of the Commission until it was shut down, and to guarantee transparency. Perhaps one of the more prestigious auditing firms should be contracted to oversee this process. I am convinced that accountability to the members of the United Nations would be very positive and very valued by friends who have donated funds and who trusted in an unprecedented effort of the United Nations, which failed completely in Guatemala. Mr. President, who will give you an explanation and give an explanation to the family members of the victims of the Commission in Guatemala? Who? Because there were people who died in prison due to an abuse of preventative detention. Others were deprived of their liberty for years, and then they were found innocent due to a lack of evidence. This is serious. But there's something even more serious, something that's very sensitive, but we shouldn't forget it. The use of false witnesses and of slander in the media are despicable acts and punishable. And worse, if they come from this organization that promotes respect of human rights. All of these are grave violations of human rights of Guatemalan people that should not go unpunished, and even less if they were committed by a commission that was supposed to be fighting impunity. Nor can these events stay in the shadows and the backs of the donor countries who were betrayed. Their good faith was betrayed. Accountability is not just about applying it to member states. It needs to also be applied to the Commission on Impunity and any agency or body that was under the auspices of the member states of this assembly. Last August, Ivan Velázquez presented a report which completely lacked in truth. That's why, as a country where national laws and international laws were broken and human rights were violated and the rights of my citizens were violated, I demand that this assembly require an exhaustive report of the actions of the Commission on Impunity in Guatemala, objectively, in keeping with the facts and with the participation of a group of countries that would guarantee the truth and accuracy of the report. As Jesus of Nazareth said, the truth will set you free. Mr. President, in the context of fighting organized crime and drug trafficking in Guatemala, a terrorist act was perpetrated on the 3rd of September in my country. 3 members of the Guatemalan armed forces were killed in a community in the north of the country. Due to this event, we took the decision of decreeing a state of siege in 22 cities in our country. In this context, I'd like to express the government of Guatemala's rejection of any attempt to drive an investigation, an independent investigation, by the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights of the United Nations. We believe that this action is yet another example of the abuses of agencies of the United Nations, abuses committed in my country. In that regard, the government of Guatemala says that it will not allow the OHCHR or any other agency of the United Nations to undertake activities that are not within their mandate. I would appreciate it if the Assembly took note of these abuses committed in Guatemala. Investigation and shedding light on this terrorist act is the strict purview of the Public Ministry of Guatemala through the corresponding prosecutor's office and with the assistance of security forces and Guatemalan law. Now, Mr. President, I would like to turn to a topic which is very important, and that is the topic of coffee. It's very important for Guatemala as a producer of this. At this time, we would like to propose the establishment of mechanisms that are more favorable for this trade activity. We would advocate for better conditions, prices, and access to markets which are more fair and better for the well-being of our economies. We would urge the International Organization of Coffee to, in transparency and with respect for equity, address this issue in a comprehensive manner. Mr. President, turning to the regional arena, the alarming crisis that continues in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela makes us think and urges us to support various efforts to restore democracy in this South American country. As a member of the Lima Group, we have resolutely supported all efforts geared to establishing dialogue between the parties to guarantee the rule of law in Venezuela. For me, Mr. President, it was a great honor to share my thoughts with this august assembly, and I thank God for providing me with this opportunity to strengthen multilateral ties between Guatemala and the rest of the world. I wish you all the best, and as a country, we will continue to play our historical role on the world stage with a view to faithful compliance with the Charter of the United Nations. And I conclude with a quote from Seneca. A person loves their country not because it is great, but because it is one's own. Thank you very much. May God bless you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I thank the President of Guatemala for his statement just made. I would urge that delegations stay in their seats while we greet the President.